From the warm light of the campfire, we cut to a cold, muddy path. We see feet sinking as the ragtag crew trek towards the front. From Diana's point of view, we see a baby crying as its mother rushes by and more civilians fleeing. Further along the path, a horse-drawn supply cart has tipped and we see a soldier whipping the horses repeatedly. Horses could be thought of as representing the spirit of freedom, but here we see them trapped in the mud and beaten, foreshadowing the plight of the soldiers who are pinned down in the trenches. The whipping of the horses also contrasts sharply to what we saw in Themyscira, where the Amazons were shown to command horses very effectively without resorting to physically beating the animals. Diana questions the approach of aimlessly whipping the mired horses and offers to help. She says, "This is not the way." Charlie immediately dismisses the idea of getting involved, saying that there's no time. As the camera pans towards the right, across the muddy pit we see a young person crying out. The war has separated this child from their mother, just as Diana has been separated from her mother. Diana then sees a wounded soldier screaming in agony. As we cut to a closer shot, it is made clear that he has lost the lower portion of one of his legs. This visual echoes the wounded men that Diana and company passed by as they entered the Dover docks just before they departed from England. As Diana expresses concern for the injured man, Sammy interjects. He swiftly dismisses the idea of helping, saying that there's nothing that she can do about it. Diana reluctantly continues along with the team, but we can see that she's conflicted. She wants to help. She wants to do something. We then cut to a wide aerial shot showing the scale of the environmental devastation of the battlefield. This is such a dramatic contrast to the idyllic landscapes of Themyscira. Here in no man's land, what may once have been lush greenery is now nothing more than naked tree trunks, clouds of smoke, and mud. As we cut to ground level, an enemy mortar shell whistles overhead and explodes behind our protagonists, letting us know that they are now well within range of enemy fire. As Diana approaches the trenches, we can perhaps see the impression of the number 76, which is created by the contrasting tones of the debris that we see positioned quite prominently in the center of frame. For reference, Diana first appeared in the comic book medium way back in 1941 in All-Star Comics issue number 8, shortly after Superman's debut in 1938 and Batman's debut in 1939. Over the decades, Diana's DC Trinity contemporaries had appeared in over a dozen films as title characters. Sadly, Diana was never given an equal opportunity on the cinematic stage. So with the 2017 film release, 76 years after her comic book debut, audiences finally got to see a silver screen feature-length film dedicated to the iconic character. The subsequent No Man's Land scene, often cited as one of the greatest scenes in any comic book movie, serves as Diana's superhero costume reveal. What makes the scene so powerful is that it is a product of thematic, artistic, cultural, allegorical, and emotional threads that have all been beautifully woven throughout the preceding hour of the film. We'll do our best to cover all of these bases as we progress through this scene. Napi leads the group into the trenches. As we descend, we intercut tracking shots that lead and follow the protagonists. An allied soldier welcomes Napi. There's an element of relief in his voice as he says, we also hear as the trench unit spreads the word. Steve senses distraction and promptly urges the team to push onward. However, Marie, a refugee with child in arms, pulls Diana aside, desperately pleading for help. This is an extension of a motif of mothers and children. We started with Diana's childhood in the idyllic paradise of Themyscira. We progressed to an industrialized London where Diana, with a playful sense of fascination, saw a baby for the first time. Now, in the midst of war, Diana sees the desperate plight of mothers and children as refugees. In a regional dialect, Marie explains how invading soldiers have seized the village of Veld that lays just beyond No Man's Land, how they've confiscated the food and enslaved everyone unable to escape. The plight of the villagers echoes the enslavement of the Amazons, as described by Hippolyta in the history lesson sequence. When Diana insists that the team needs to help these people, Chief raises a complication.
We need to help these people.
We have to stay on mission.
The next safe crossing is at least a day away.
If we think about what that means from Marie's perspective, In order to make the appeal to the Allied soldiers to help the village, she may have either travelled for 2 days, so 1 day from the village to a safe crossing point, and then another day from the safe crossing point to the trench. Alternatively, Marie has risked crossing via a more precarious path with the child. Either way, the plight of the besieged village is harrowing. As Diana halts the team's progress, we catch glimpses of a sign in the background that states, "Do not stand about here." From the team's perspective, they can't stand about here because they are focused on the mission and the timing involved for it. So when Diana insists that they cannot leave without helping these people, it is with a certain degree of frustration that Steve explains why this place is called No Man's Land and why the thought of crossing it is considered impossible.
This is no man's land, Diana. It means no man can cross it, all right? This battalion has been here for nearly a year, and they barely gained an inch. All right, because on the other side, there are a bunch of Germans pointing machine guns at every square inch of this place. This is not something you can cross. It's not possible.
Steve's words harken back to a conversation with Diana on the London-bound boat trip.
Look, I appreciate your spirit, but this war it's a great big mess. And there's not a whole lot you and I can do about that. I mean, we can get back to London and try to get to the men who can.
I'm the man who can.
So on the boat, Steve indicated doubt in the power of the individual to make a difference, a hopelessness in the face of the situation brought on by the war. Here in No Man's Land, it is the same constrained perspective brought to the fore. When Steve says that no man can cross it, some would immediately have had Diana jump in saying, "Oh, but I am no man." Instead, writer Alan Heinberg and director Patty Jenkins remained laser focused on the cinematic goal, that being Diana's coming-of-age story. Instead of pandering, they return to a thematic thread from the discussion in the infirmary, the idea of do nothing versus do something. And so Diana challenges Steve with his own moral compass.
This is not something you can cross. It's not possible.
So what? So we do nothing?
No, we are doing something. We are. We can't save everyone in this war. This is not what we came here to do.
However, from Diana's perspective, the village speaks directly to her mission, the very reason that she left Themyscira.
I'm going, Mother. I cannot stand by while innocent lives are lost. If no one else will defend the world from Ares, then I must. I have to go.
There's so much. So much you do not understand.
I understand enough. That I'm willing to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. Like you once did.
Diana resolves to save the village, and in the background we see a signpost. An arrow pointing to the right is labelled as Petticoat Lane. This refers to a fashion and clothing market in London. Now, if we think back to when Diana first arrived in London, Steve was concerned about how conspicuous her outfit was. Of course, being on a sensitive espionage mission, Steve promptly took Diana to the Selfridges department store in order to attempt to blend in more effectively into London society. Debbie Sessions, writer at the Vintage Dancer, posted a breakdown of the period costumes used in the film. Wonder Woman movie 1918 clothing, Diana's London costumes. In her article, she described Diana's final outfit as a grey British tweed suit, coat and skirt, worn over a blouse and cotton petticoat. So what happened was that upon arrival in Man's World, Diana took guidance from Steve and conformed to the situation, and in so doing concealed who she was, with a petticoat literally one of the elements of the costume. So here in the trench, the path of Petticoat Lane can be associated with Diana's capitulating to the influences of Man's World. In this shot, Steve and his crew are on the right, the direction of Petticoat Lane. They expect Diana to follow their path and fall in line with their mission. But for Diana, that would mean neglecting her true calling. This is something she can no longer do, and so she walks in the opposite direction. On the upper section of the signpost, the arrow pointing left is labelled as C5/174. There are 5 C's of leadership: commitment, core values, communication, calmness, and courage. It's also worth noting that the 174th Infantry Brigade of the US Army was deployed in World War I. For those unfamiliar with military terminology, infantry are foot soldiers, the type of unit that would cross no man's land. What subsequently happens in this scene is that Diana assumes a type of leadership role. She demonstrates the 5 C's of leadership, and this initiates an infantry crossing of no man's land. As Diana lets down her hair, the camera sweeps around her, revealing a watch in the background, hanging near the ladder. The pocket watch, as discussed in the infirmary, had taken on a thematic significance, a call to action that reminds us to do something as opposed to do nothing.
My father told me once, he said, if you see something wrong happening in the world, you can either do nothing or you can do something. And I already tried nothing.
In the face of the limitations being imposed by the external world, Diana will choose to do something. In a subtle nod to the Linda Carter TV show, Diana turns on the spot to reveal that she's wearing Antiope's headband, the mantle entrusted to her by her mother when she left Themyscira.
This belonged to the greatest warrior in our history, our beloved Antiope. Make sure you're worthy of it.
I will.
So to Diana, this moment signifies that she's assuming the role of Antiope, the type of general that we saw leading from the front. This approach of leading from the front is of course in sharp contrast to what we saw from the British general who, in the relative comfort of London, callously dismissed loss of life.
Sir, I've seen that gas with my own eyes. If it is used, it will kill everyone on both sides. They will all die.
That is what soldiers do, Captain.
You would knowingly sacrifice all those lives, as if they mean less than yours?
Diana, let's talk
As
about
if
this
they
outside.
mean nothing? Where I come from,
Diana.
generals don't hide in their offices like cowards.
That's enough.
They fight alongside their soldiers. They die with them on the battlefield.
That's enough.
You
My
should be
apologies,
ashamed.
sir. My apologies.
As Diana ascends the ladder, she sheds the cloak, revealing her shield. The radiant motif of the shield emerging from behind the cloak is evocative of the sun emerging from dark clouds. We cut to shots revealing her indestructible bracelet, her armored boots, the lasso of truth, and then her sun-emblazoned headband rising from the trench. The emotional weight of Diana's decision is heightened by the use of slow motion. As Steve turns and realizes that Diana is up the ladder, he calls out to her.
Diana!
This is a callback to the opening on Themyscira, where we saw young Diana sneaking off and running to the training ground while her tutor, Mnemosyne, ran after her shouting, "Diana!" As a child, Diana desperately wanted to get to the training ground so that she could be like all the Amazon warriors that she aspired to emulate. Here in this scene, Steve plays a similar role to the tutor as he explains the history and context of No Man's Land, while Diana cuts loose and runs onto the battleground. In so doing, she finally becomes the Amazon warrior she always wanted to be. We then cut to a wider, slow-motion tracking shot of Diana, giving us a full reveal of the Wonder Woman costume. Water fire impacting behind the trench on the left of frame reminds us of the ever-present danger of No Man's Land. The Allied soldiers are rationally justified in remaining in the trench. The camera, placed at waist level, slightly elevates Diana's eye line as she strides forward with self-confidence. The shot composition also positions her sun-emblazoned golden headband at the top of the frame, among the parted clouds. We cut to the sound of a gunshot and track a bullet as it races across No Man's Land. With her heightened perception, she watches it in slow motion and swats it aside with her indestructible bracelet. We cut to a ground-level shot of Steve and the men in the trenches. They are below our position. They doubt her. We cut back to Diana blocking another bullet. The camera rises to her eye level and pans as she advances. The camera movement lifts the audience. We then cut to another ground level shot of an Imperial German officer down in their trench, again below camera level. The officer issues the order to open fire as another shot pulls back across the German trench. We cut to a ground level trucking shot of Diana's armored boots as she builds up to a steady pace, and then to another waist level tracking shot that tilts up from her boots to her deflecting another bullet. Again, we are moving with her. Seeing the progress Diana has actually made, and without any aid whatsoever, Steve realizes a new possibility. Diana has become the impetus for Steve to do something, and so Steve rallies his team in support of her. Now we catch a glimpse of blue sky via a reverse angle looking up out of the trench, as Steve and his team ascend the ladders. By contrast, the soldiers who remain rooted in the trench are photographed from ground level and with longer focal lengths. These tighter angled shots exclude the sky and instead show these soldiers surrounded by mud and barbed wire. We cut back to a tracking shot of Diana blocking bullets and then to a reverse angle that follows her. This shot refocuses our attention on the shield, which of course features prominently in subsequent shots, first batting aside mortar fire and then becoming the focus of the deadly machine gun fire. Note that on the horizon we can already catch a glimpse of the steeple from the church in Veld, which ultimately becomes a focal point in the following action sequence. It is now under intense machine gun fire that Diana is brought to a standstill. She stands alone, unable to push forward any further, but unwilling to relent. But she's not alone for very long. With Diana drawing the bulk of the fire, Steve, Charlie, Chief and Sammy weaken the German trench defenses and disrupt the machine gun fire. This disruption inspires more Allied soldiers to join the charge. Once again, note how the soldiers climbing the ladders are photographed from a low angle, and as they ascend we catch a glimpse of the blue sky. With the disruption to the machine gun fire, we catch another glimpse of the steeple as Diana runs forward and leaps. She lands in the German trench, raises her shield and smashes it into the machine gun, breaking it apart. This introduces an action motif of destroying weapons of war. This is an action that is featured prominently throughout the rest of the film, often accentuated with slow motion. As soon as the German trench has been pacified, Diana is immediately looking forward. Again we see the steeple and we are reminded that Veld lays just beyond no man's land. Diana calls to Steve and encourages the team to push on. Diana's destiny awaits.